Hello, ladies and gentlemen. The AI economy is projected to bring an enormous bounty to the global GDP to the tune of trillions of dollars, according to some estimates, $16 trillion by 2030. And that will require a huge transformation across every industry. And what fuels this incredible revolution, the so-called fourth industrial revolution, is the combination of algorithms and data, where algorithms are the engines or the pipes, if you like, and data is the new oil, is the fuel of the engine. So data are about to explode. Think of the Internet of Things, think of data coming from 5G networks. And likewise, the global big data market is going to explode as well. And that will create winners and losers. So according to some research from McKinsey looking into the next 10 years or so, companies that invest in artificial intelligence, in data, the front runners, if you like, will reap the benefits of the AI economy to the tune of 122% uplift on their cash flow performance, compared to the followers, the companies that will wait to see where technology goes and then take a decision and then start investing, and laggards who will be constantly challenged with their existing business models. And what this slide shows to me is that if you're not a front runner, you will not be around in the next 10 years. But here's the challenge. Here's why I highlighted the challenge with this red circle. If you notice, the front runners need to invest heavily in their data and AI infrastructure in order to become front runners. And this is a typical innovator's dilemma problem. Do you take the plunge? Do you invest in your infrastructure and your capabilities? Do you allow this huge hit on your cash flow in order to become a front runner and a winner? So this dilemma poses an obvious problem. How can we de-risk this journey to the AI economy? And one way of de-risking this journey is to share data. So I would call that a new data sharing imperative. Because on the one hand, you have some very data-rich companies, think of the Googles and the Apples and the Facebooks of this world. And on the other hand, you have everyone else. And this gap between those two players in the AI economy is growing. So some statistics are really interesting here. Like you go into the US market and you look at companies that get personalization right. And personalization is a good index of being good with data, because it requires the connection of many data together in order to get your very good personalization. So only 15% of US companies get personalization right, but that adds 800 billion of additional revenue. Again, going back to this dilemma between, are you a front runner or you're a laggard? So let's think of terms such as data liquidity as the new terms, as the new currency, if you like, that we need to think about in this new world of the AI economy. And what does data liquidity mean? Data liquidity is how quickly, how fast, and how securely we can collaborate around data. So think of, for example, use cases where utility companies can make more relevant offers to customers by sharing customer attribute data, or perhaps supermarkets optimizing the supply chain by exchanging wastage data, or companies that share customers. Let's think of a hotel chain and an airliner that allocate loyalty points more accurately, and they can serve customers better on their end-to-end customer journey. So how can we connect data? There are key problems with data sharing. In an ideal world, it'll be very easy just to connect data together between different organizations and do some amazing machine learning and AI on top of it. But there's lots of challenges, and here is 4 of them, perhaps the biggest ones. One is data interoperability. Different organizations have different schemas, different taxonomies, different models. So how do you harmonize? How do you align? How do you create a sort of canonical model, as the experts would say, that applies for all those different data sets that need to be connected? Okay. And what about data governance? How you can ensure that data sharing will be done in the prescribed way, as it should be? How can you track what's happening and what's going on? How can you ensure decisions are taken in an efficient and effective way? How you can enforce, if you like, standardization in your data. Then there is the obvious problem around regulation and compliance, right? GDPR is something that has spooked everybody, and understandably so, given the fines, but also given the reputational damage of not treating sensitive data that are very personal, in the right way. And that also leads to the aspect and the problem and the challenge of ethics. So you can be compliant and you can, be within the boundaries of the law and still suffer from a huge reputational damage because you have not thought through the ethical implications of bias in your data, or algorithms that exclude certain social groups, let's say, and so on. And finally, there's another big challenge, I think, with data sharing. That data right now sits in companies and is thought of as an intangible asset, an asset that is can't really put it on your balance sheet. You can't borrow against. It cannot become a collateral. And here's a story. Caesar's Palace collapses in 2015, and the single most valuable asset was reportedly their loyalty program, which was in fact a database of customers. It was valued at $1 billion. So the management of Caesar's Palace was sitting on top of this $1 billion asset, but they could not borrow a single penny against it because it was an intangible asset. So therefore, can we think of ways whereby data sharing, data monetization transforms this equation and data become a tangible asset, something that you can lease perhaps, or something that you can sell? Very bold thoughts, if you prefer, but maybe that's that we should be thinking of. So here's a way of solving for those problems, if you like, okay, for those big challenges. And this concept is called the data trust. So what is a data trust? The data trust is a governance and architecture model or framework for data sharing. And it's made out of a few key ingredients, if you like. You can think of it as a market exchange, as a data exchange, whereby data producers and data consumers exchange data. But in order for that to happen, you also need, very importantly, someone to become the steward, if you like, the trustee, okay, the trusted party that ensures that this exchange follows the rules. And that's why you need a third player in the marketplace, in the trustee, okay, who is also responsible on data governance. And then you have a set of policies that everybody must abide with, and those policies govern how data is shared and used within the data trust. And what happens in the data trust, what is being exchanged or what is being created, are assets. And those assets can be data sets and rich data sets, but it also can be AI models or predictive analytics dashboards. So this idea of the data trust, we at Willis Towers Watson thought it was a really interesting idea because it solved for this obvious problem of data collaboration, of data sharing in a very compliant, secure, and ethical way if you did manage to create an effective and efficient legal framework around the data trust. So we experimented with this idea. We ran a few pilots, and I'd like to tell you a few things about what we found out as we explore this concept for business, to create a business ecosystem for data sharing and solving for common problems. So here's a typical use case that we examined. So, we at Willis Towers Watson, we're all about risk, people, and capital. These are sort of the three things that we solve for. And this is a use case from the people side of our company. So we as an organization, we help big corporates understand issues around their human capital, how to engage with their employees, how to improve employee experience, careers, and so on and so forth. One of the key problems that organizations have because of the impact of automation is that they understand that in order for them to become competitive, they really need to think hard about how to reskill and upskill their workforce. And this is a huge challenge that is very data-driven. So in this scenario, for example, what we are thinking of in terms of using a data trust and data ecosystem to solve for that problem is whereby, you have like 5 different actors in the ecosystem. You have, let's say, various companies. You have us as Willis Towers Watson without data. You perhaps have a startup, a very innovative startup that has unique capabilities in HR analytics, and we all come together. We use this concept of the data trust that ensures, for example, that if there are any employee data, will be completely anonymized, and they will be used as aggregates, with the final and ultimate goal of delivering some sort of application, a data trust application that will help employees navigate their careers more efficiently and more effectively, so we can have this win-win between people finding interesting, productive, and profitable things to do within companies, and companies being able to gain from productivity and engagement of the employees. And you can only do that, I would argue, by having certain infrastructure in place where different companies that have different data sets but still have a common goal can come together and solve for that common goal in a collaborative, and again, regulatory compliance, all those words, right? All those words way. So here's what some things that we learned was we tested this idea with a number of clients and a number of use cases. And there's some themes that really sort of featured very strongly when we spoke to those clients. And here's 3 of them that sort of surfaced as the top 3, if you like, lessons and emerging themes from those pilots. First of all, that data privacy and data quality are top of mind. Every player in the market, every corporation, every company understands, respects, and upholds the idea of data privacy, and is extremely important. So if we indeed aspire to create such an ecosystem of data, then one of the most important things to solve for, and absolutely solve for, is ensure data privacy, anonymization, and security. And of course, data quality as well. So there were, voices that expressed uncertainty about what sort of quality is in the data, and how can we, when we share data, bring some kind of governance around the data in order to ensure that every player contributes data of similar quality, or there is a way perhaps to improve the quality of the data so we can all share and produce value. The second thing was that it kind of like validated very strongly, I would say, this sort of hypothesis that there is a need for data liquidity, that there is a need for cross-industry collaboration. There is clearly a need. And there are some use cases, not the data trust, I don't think the data trust will solve for everything, but there are some use cases where it makes sense for cross-industry collaboration. Let's say, for example, from a health insurer and a health provider and some employer coming together and solving for some common problem without breaking competition law, without breaking, again, I'm caveating everything I say with the words regulatory, legal compliance, and ethics, okay? But there's definitely some use cases where collaboration is the key for solving big challenges. And the third thing that was somewhat unexpected as far as I was concerned, but it's kind of obvious now that I see it, is that companies, as they're trying to compete in this new and emerging economy of AI and data, they are often challenged by their own cultures. So data literacy is very important for companies. Can employees, the people who are the front end, dealing with customers, how quickly can we upskill people across organization, across departments, across lobs, in order to be able to start thinking in terms of data? Okay, and how can a data trust project help organizations improve the data literacy and drive the sort of data-driven culture, which is essential for competing in the AI economy? Okay, so let me finish off with just a couple of more a little bit more of a deep dive into how we actually thought of the pilots of the data trust. So here's like a little diagram that shows you the workflow at a very high level, but it has some important points that I would like to highlight. First and foremost, that in order for you to build together this data ecosystem, you really need to start with legal and regulatory compliance. We worked very closely with our legal team in order to think about what should be the principles, what should be the foundational structure and charter of the data trust. What do we stand for? What are the values? And how does those values translate into actual contracts between the players as they come together to share data? So this is one very important aspect of putting together a data trust. Now, the second aspect is what happens to the data, and how do the data connect in order to run those interesting machine learning, analytics, and AI things on top of them? And there's, I would argue, two ways. You can centralize the pooling of data, and that will be one way of doing it, and perfectly legitimate way, but we discovered that there was a lot of pushback against this. Companies that we spoke with felt that by physically transferring, if you like, the data sets into a third party, especially when that transferring involved other people in the ecosystem also having access to that data through this centralized hub, did not make them feel very comfortable. So we kind of pivoted early on towards a more decentralized architecture for data sharing. And we looked into ways whereby we could perhaps leverage blockchain and distributed AI techniques in ensuring that the data in the ecosystem stay where they are, they stay on-prem. We have some data governance layer on top, and then what we do is once we have identified the use case and we have gone through the data preparation, then we virtualize the data, essentially. So we have a virtual sort of data workplace, if you like, for the data scientists, but the data stay on-prem, and the AI is distributed to the various data sources. And that is the schema, if you like, that is the concept, the architecture, very broadly speaking, that we are sort of testing more deeply in the days and months to come. So once you have this capability, once you have the legal constructs and the legal framework and the privacy framework, very, very importantly, if you're going to be using any data that are personal, and you definitely need consent for that as well. So you need to have all those mechanisms in place, and you have this system of decentralization whereby data stay on-prem, then interestingly, you can start your collaborative innovation, and you can build perhaps an API layer on top of that. You can do all kinds of interesting things and come up with results such as the assets I mentioned before, the analytics dashboards, the AI models, and whatever you can think of. Okay, so here's my last slide to summarize, if you like, our vision at Willis Towers Watson. What do we want to achieve through this innovation experimentation stage that we're in? We want to create the foundations of a data ecosystem that solves for big problems in people, capital, and risk through a secure and compliant data exchange that enables cross-industry collaboration for advanced analytics and AI. And we stand by 5, if you like, pillars or 5 ambitions or principles. One is that we take ethics not just seriously, we live by ethics. And the data trust will have its governance informed by how we can ensure that the data ethics and AI ethics are left, right, and center in everything that we do. Then in terms of our goals, we want to use the data trust to really innovate around predictive and prescriptive analytics. So we set the bar very high, but we think that's where the value is, especially when you have the capability of pulling some data together that would have been otherwise impossible to do. So huge, huge opportunity there. Thirdly, that security and compliance, again, top of mind. Okay, compliance with regulatory frameworks and regulatory and laws in different jurisdictions, whether it's GDPR, whether it's CCPA, and so on. We're thinking of the data trust as a way to monetize data. Think back on this concept of data as an intangible asset, and a trusted data marketplace perhaps may be a way of transforming this into a tangible asset. So this is one of the ideas that we're going to explore moving forward. And ultimately what we want to deliver is a balance between commercial and social value. And that was, again, something that featured very strongly, very prominently from our initial discussions with clients, that clients saw the data economy as something that had to be in a way that there is something for everybody, and especially for society at large. Whether we solve for a problem, let's say in the workplace, then the beneficiary should and must be the employee. If we solve a problem in health, then the beneficiary and should and must be the patient. So how we bring value, new value, if you like, into our own businesses, but also into society, is what will inspire and does inspire our vision for the data trust. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to me, and if you have any more questions, please reach out.